In a previous video, I described how to make the segmented Christmas tree bells to hang on a Christmas tree. In this video, I'm going to be making some more bells, but I'm going to be using the Dizzy pattern to make these Christmas tree bells. I'm starting off with a laminate board. This laminate board has 87 layers of wood of different colors and contrast. The overall width of the board is about 3.5 inches, and the thickness is about 1 3/4 inches. From this laminate board, I'll cut out round discs, such as this. Then I can take these discs back on the Accu-Slice system, slice them once again to produce my thin laminate disc. Then I'll take these discs, rotate each one a small amount to get my Dizzy pattern, and then take it to the lathe and turn out my Christmas tree bells. I'll probably use a contrasting solid piece of wood on the bottom of the bell just to give it a little bit of an accent, and I might even do something different on the top. So the first step is to take this to the bandsaw and cut out my round circle disc. Okay, I'm ready to cut out my round disc from this laminated board, and I'm using a bandsaw for this operation. In the past I used a scroll saw, but the bandsaw is faster. I get straighter sides, just a better way to cut these round small discs. And I'm using a 1/4 inch wide blade with about 10 teeth per inch. Now this board's kind of big, so I think I'll cut it in a couple smaller pieces just to get started. And when I'm cutting these discs out, I'll be cutting outside my line. And then I'll take these to my disc sander and sand it right to the line. I have my disc all cut out now, and I did cut out just outside the line. So now I'll be using my disc sander to sand these right to the line. That'll give me a perfect round disc, and because I'm using this disc sander and it's perfectly parallel, I can get nice straight edges on my disc. Notice that I'm cutting towards the center of the 12-inch diameter disc sander. If I was to cut on the outside edge of the disc, it would probably burn the wood. And now the disc has been sanded right to the line and is perfectly round. I'm ready to slice off my disc, and I mounted 9 of these discs to a piece of MDF with some Type-on glue. And I did mark the top edges of all these pieces of disc, so when I rearrange these pieces I can keep that in the correct orientation. I'll be cutting my disc 50,000 of an inch thick, so that'd be 1 full revolution for the kerf of the blade and then 1 revolution for 50,000ths of an inch. I'm using a 1/2 inch blade, 10 teeth per inch. The purpose of this first cut is to provide for a flat surface so that all subsequent cuts will be perfectly parallel to this first surface. This first slice is scrapped and is then thrown away. I then rotate the indexing knob 1 full turn, or 50,000ths of an inch, to allow for the kerf of the blade, and then another full revolution of 50,000ths of an inch for the thickness of the board I want to cut. Each of the discs will now be 50,000ths of an inch thick. I will keep each of the discs sliced in the order in which they were sliced, and in piles of the discs from which they were sliced. This will provide for the optimum alignment when gluing the disc together in the future. I continue slicing the disc until all the discs have been cut from the laminate disc. I just finished slicing 45 of these discs on the Accu-Slice system, and my sacrificial fence does go all the way to the bandsaw table, but see, sawdust does creep around it and get into the channel. And so it does require a little bit of maintenance on your carriage after you cut a series of discs. And I can start feeling a little resistance, you know, on my wheels because the sawdust is getting inside this channel and on the wheels. And you can actually see it on the wheels. On these inner wheels, you can start seeing some sawdust buildup. And if you don't wipe that off, it'll start, you know, getting itself embedded into the plastic and create little indentations in the plastic wheel. So I usually take a rag and wipe those off after every set of cutting a disc. Just, you know, either dry or damp rag. Don't use any solvent like acetone or anything. Just, if anything, use just water. But I usually just use a dry towel and clean those wheels off. And next thing I do is you take my same towel and run it through the rail, and that gets sawdust out of that channel. Then of course use a vacuum to clean up the remaining sawdust. For this last set of discs, I am using my low profile carriage. I like this carriage better than the bigger one because, especially with these smaller pieces, because I can see where I'm cutting over the top and I can lower my blade guides lower, so it's much safer. So whenever possible, I like to use this low profile carriage. So again, I'm ready to cut off a piece of scrap, and then I'll cut all my remaining disc. Okay, I have 135 discs that I cut from that segmented board, and I did double check the accuracy of the thickness of these as they came off the bandsaw. I was really quite surprised. I mean, actually amazed at the accuracy. These were all, you know, 52 thousandths plus or minus a thousandth of an inch across all the discs, which is very, very accurate. But when they come off the bandsaw, you get a little bit of a burr on the one edge. And I can show that here. There's a burr right here. And that burr occurs where the piece of wood kicks out the bandsaw blade at the very end. So that needs to be taken off. And you can do it one of two ways. If you have a nice sharp chisel, you know, a chisel will take it off quite easily. What I usually end up doing is I get a piece of 220 grit sandpaper. And I just do a quick sanding on both sides, just like one or two swipes, and that cleans it off and gets everything nice and flat. Then I continue sanding until all the discs have been sanded. Notice I'm using a glove so I don't sand my fingertips. Here's my alignment, my black mark on there. That alignment is critical because when you're gluing these discs up, these boards may not be perfectly, you know, symmetrical. I mean, between pressure on the glue and the thickness of the glue joint and the, you know, 1,000th variation in the board thickness, the left and right may be slightly different. So I always try and keep the orientation the same, and that's the purpose of that mark on there, to make sure I do that. Okay, I just set my 15 of these discs in my alignment jig and determine my angle of rotation so I know how much I'm going to rotate each one of these going forward. So that is my basic angle of rotation. So I'm using this glue jig to start gluing these up. I have my pieces all set, and I have my mark that I made. These all on the same side, and my procedure is to take each disc and flip each one as I glue it up. So starting with the first disc, and I'm using Type Bond 3 glue again for these glue ups. The 1/4" diameter pins in the Dizzy glue up jig contain plastic sleeves. This enables these pins to hold the disc tightly so that the discs do not move during the gluing and clamping. I normally coat both sides of the disc with Type Bond 3 glue, to assure complete coverage and good glue joints. Then I continued to glue and add each of the 15 discs to the Dizzy glue-up jig, double checking the alignment of each disc as it is added. From time to time it may be necessary to readjust and tighten the clamps to keep everything tight and perfectly aligned. As each of the discs is added, I use finger pressure for 5 to 10 seconds to hold and set each of the discs in place. With that technique of having these rubber sleeves on these pins for one, and push them in so it's real tight so there's absolutely no lateral movement of that pieces of wood, I was able to do, look, all 15 of those boards at one time. And you should be able to see the alignment of that. It's near perfect. So I'm going to take this right to the press and clamp it down. So I think it's good enough, I don't think it'll move with these clamps being real tight. I can do a one-step process. It'll save a little bit of time. Now I do want to watch this top board, because usually when you put something like this in a press, if anyone that's going to slip, it's going to be the top board. Next I'm making some segmented rings for the bottom of the bell. These will have 24 segments per ring, and I'm using some walnuts, some maple, and some padauk for some of these rings. So I set my Accu-Wedge to 24 segments, and I put my line on the board so I can get my top side, and also I'm using my laser beam so I can mark my cut. And I'm making these wedges, the width of the wedges, 0.54 inches, which will give me a 4 1/4 inch diameter ring. I've already completed sanding some walnut and some maple rings. So let me sand the padauk. And all I'm doing is sanding there's a burr on the edge here, and then fuzzies on the bottom edge. So I'm just sanding those off. And I'm just using some 220 sandpaper. So let's put a rubber band around these and see how the alignment goes. Okay, so that's pretty good. That's my padauk. I have 2 walnut rings, and I also have 2 maple rings. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make some maple rings with some walnut and some padauk spacers in here. Okay, this is my Accu stop set for my 4 1/4 inch diameter boards I just cut, and I want to put a spacer in between all the wedges now to give me an accent strip. So this piece of strip is 50,000 of an inch thick. So all I'm doing now is I'm going to move this back, put my spacer in there, lock it in place, remove it, and then turn my index wheel in until it just touches the board. And that should give me the correct diameter rings when I'm done. It should be about 50,000 of an inch thinner. Give me a total 4 1/4 inch wide board. So we'll see how that works. But that should be good. So let me go and cut my 24 wedges, and then I'll cut my spacer strips. This is a little modeling table saw, and it's nice for cutting these thin pieces of wood. It's pretty hard to cut this on a big table saw. And what I'm doing, I don't want in grain, you know, facing out here. I want the same grain. So I'm cutting this board the width of my wedges, and then I'll cut pieces the thickness of the wedge. So I set this to the width of the wedge. So let me go ahead and cut that off. Okay, next I'm going to cut the pieces to the exact width of the wedges. I put a stop here. So I push the board against the stop, push it through the blade. Then I usually use a pencil eraser to move it away from the blade and out so it doesn't jam up against the blade. Okay, I sanded these wedges like I did the others. And you see this is about, oh good, almost ½ inch smaller in diameter than the regular wedge. So I've made pieces all cut, and I sand the edges lightly just to get rid of the burr. You have to be careful because these are pretty thin and they're fragile. And then I stick them in between each of the wedges. Now these wedges are going in the opposite direction. Ideally, I should have made a block of wood like this, the exact size of this wedge, and cut them off like this. And then the grain would run in the same direction. But these pieces are so thin, I don't think it mattered. But if these were thicker pieces with wood expansion and contraction with age, it would possibly crack. But these are so thin, I don't think it's going to make any difference. There we go, and hopefully that ring is about the same size as the other ring, and it is. So this will make a nice ring where I'll, put it in between rings like that to give me an accent ring. Well, I finished gluing up my dizzy sections for the centers of these bells, and I'll be making 3 bells for this project. And now I'm ready to start gluing up my segmented pieces to make the bases for the very bottom of the bells. And I cut these all out on the Accu-Slice system, and some of these have 24 segments per ring, a couple have 48, and this one actually has 96 segments per ring. So since there's more than 24 segments per ring, I'll be using epoxy for the glue up. So I'll be using the same procedure I used in the past for gluing up these segmented disc. Using epoxy cement, I mixed up. This is the West epoxy system. And I just coat both sides of all the segments and then clamp them with rubber bands. And again, I'm using epoxy because of the long setup time. Type on 2 or 3 glue, would have like a 10-minute setup time, where this epoxy is like 45 minutes to an hour, so I have plenty of time to glue up all my wedges to make my segmented disc. Also note on the wedges, the black alignment lines that were on the original boards before they were cut are all facing up and alternate between each of the wedges. And I showed in my previous videos, I like using rubber bands for my clamps. It clamps it nice and even, and I get nice symmetrical segmented disc. So I prefer these much over using the clamps. I have all my segmented disc all glued up, and I ran these through my sander to get rid of the excess glue and clean them up so I can see the surface. Now I'm all set to attach them to some MDF boards and run them over to my Accu-Wedge and slice some thin slices. I'll be slicing a variety of thicknesses, probably as much as a 1/4 inch down to maybe 100,000ths inch thick pieces. So let me see what I get out here. So first I have to cut off my scrap piece just to get everything nice and square. From that Padauk and walnut disc, I cut pieces of discs ranging from a thickness of a 1/4 inch, the thickest, and down to 100,000ths, actually 50,000ths at the thinnest. In a likewise manner, I sliced the remaining segmented disc, including the segmented disc with the 50,000th inch thick spacers. In previous videos I've been using this Dizzy glue jig for gluing up my laminate discs for making my Dizzy bowl projects. But it could also be used to glue up segmented disc as long as the discs are the same diameter. In this case I'm making some 5-layer to 6-layer segmented discs for the bases of some Dizzy bells I'm working on. And I'm going to be gluing these discs together because I'm doing alignment. I have, in this case, some disc here with some segments with some pieces in the middle. I want to rotate those to get a pattern, and I want the alignment to be accurate, so I can do that quite easily on the Dizzy glue jig. I've adjusted my jig a little bit. I got my first disc in there, ready to put my second one on, which is a little bit bigger. So I'm going to glue the first disc on. I normally coat both sides of the disc with Type Bond 3 glue to assure complete coverage and good glue joints. When adding subsequent disc, it's important that the glue lines of the wedges stagger the glue lines of the added discs. When adding the segmented discs with the spacers, I'm making sure to accurately stagger and align each of the discs. And you see what I've done here on the pattern. The alternating segments. I continue to add the remaining discs to complete the assembly. It may be necessary to align and adjust the pins to make sure everything is nice and tight. And I'll take this to my press and press it for about half an hour. Yeah, so once again I put a disc on top and then put it in my press. And again, just watch that my layers don't move on me. Slowly add a little bit of pressure and then increase the pressure till glue starts coming out on my joints. Okay, I finished gluing up all my bases. I have a bunch of extras here for other projects. And I have some tops here, pieces that I've kind of pieced together. And I selected my 3 bells, and I selected 3 different bases. from my patterns I put together. So I got my one here, and for a top on this I'm going to use a round white piece and a piece of padauk on top. For my second one here, I'm going to actually have two pieces of a base I'm going to glue together with walnut and maple, and the top will be a padauk ring, and then this Cadillac's top, and the third one's another pattern, again with a padauk ring. I think I use this piece of Cadillac's, and then this is a ring I made of some bubinga. So I think that'll be kind of different. So all three are going to be different. So I'm going to start gluing these up first of all, and I'm going to start gluing first of all the bases to the bodies, and I'll be gluing that on the glue up lathe. Okay, once again I'm gluing up my two sections, my main body to my base on my old jet lathe. This is a lathe I replaced with my Powermatic for turning, so I just use this lathe now for glue ups. I'm putting two chucks on this lathe, one on the headstock and one on the tailstock. And the reason I like using the lathe for glue ups is because now everything will be centered. This base is centered in the chuck, and my base will be centered in the chuck. And then I'll glue to get two together and they won't get lopsided, they'll be perfectly aligned. After gluing the segmented ring base to the Dizzy pattern midsection, I'll then glue the top segmented layers to the top of the Dizzy pattern section. Finally, I will glue the top of the bell assembly to a maple board on a lathe faceplate for turning. Okay, I'm ready to start turning this first bell. I'm starting with this Hunter tool. I use a variety of lathe tools for turning, but I do prefer the carbide tipped tools because there's a lot of epoxy joints in my Dizzy projects, and the carbide tools last much longer. I mainly use the Hunter carbide tools, but I also use some of the Easywood carbide tip tools, including the square tip, the round tip, and also the pointed tip. I switch back and forth between the various tools to get the desired shape of the bell. To shape the inside of the bell, my preference is to use the Easywood round tip, carbide tipped tool. After finalizing the interior shape of the bell, I then continue to contour the outside of the bell. I leave the top of the bell about 1.5 inches thick on the faceplate. If I were to make it any smaller than that, it might break off. The final shape of the top of the bell will be turned later. Finally, I sand both the inside and outside of the bell, starting with 100 grit sandpaper and then going down to 400 grit. I then do a final sanding with 4/0 steel wool. So next I remove the chuck from the headstock with my bell on it and put it to my tailstock with a rotating adapter. And I do this so I make sure everything stays centered. So I put my hole jaws on my headstock, I'm moving in, and now I'll clamp. So now when I cut this off, everything will stay perfectly straight. I'm using the Easywood carbide pointed tip tool to finalize the shape at the top of the bell. I'll then do the final cutoff with my parting tool. I'm using the Hunter tool to remove the nib on the top of the bell, and then I'll finish the bell by sanding. Sorry my face shield's getting in the way of some of the shot here. That completes the egg. I'm going to give it a couple coats of bush oil and some polyurethane, and we'll finish it. And it's on to the next bell. This completes the production of these 3 Dizzy pattern bells that were made from that single laminate board at the start of the video. Although the body of the 3 bells are identical, I did change the bells slightly by having different patterns of some segmented layered disc for both the bottom and top of the bells. The bells again were turned both inside and out, and I put a little brass button at the top of each of the bells just to give it a place to hang on the Christmas tree. So these are the 3 bells, both the outside and also the inside. And each of these bells is about a little over 1/8 of an inch thick, so they're fairly thin. And I did give these 2 coats of bush oil, followed by 1 coat of white bond polyurethane finish. Now these bells, along with other projects I made with the Accu-Slice system in both the Dizzy patterns and also some segmented pieces, are listed on our website. And if you have any additional questions or concerns, please drop us an email or give us a call. And again, thank you for watching this video.